All right, our second topic this week. We saw some criticism in the Wall Street Journal on the idea that diversity in leadership for companies and profits could be related. Now, this dates back to a 2015 study by McKinsey that showed a correlation, not causation, but a correlation between certain companies. They didn't disclose which companies, large companies, and that had a diversity in their decision making, whether racial or gender or whatever, and higher profits. And so from that, companies, the kind of copycat world we live in, there were efforts made to try to be more diverse, and with the expectation that profits would follow from this. And so in this the Wall Street Journal piece that we're looking at, and we'll have in the show notes, they were like, oh well, that didn't happen, that just by getting more diversity and so forth. And they essentially claimed that the McKinsey study was misleading in this way. And McKinsey study, they were like, hey, well, we didn't say it was causation. We said it was, that we found a correlation. And so there's been, it's been pointed out that other people haven't been able to replicate this and so forth. Now, some of that can be biased, because if you don't want to replicate it, you can choose companies that wouldn't show that. But nonetheless, we wanted to discuss just from, consider the nature of the criticism. Is the criticism fair? And then maybe what may the criticism be missing? Like what context? So just kind of what your reaction to the criticism of the study and kind of the position taken by the author, in that Wall Street Journal piece.
Yeah, I think first you make a great point that all these studies can be skewed based on which companies you're looking at, so on and so forth. I do think that the author to me represents something we've seen in our culture, which is a hostility to this idea of just diversity in general. And here we can zero it in on corporate America and the decisions for DEI and hiring and all the buzzwords and acronyms that get people fired up and triggered. But
can I throw a little texture on that? I think I agree with you, but with the hostility doesn't seem to be diversity in the abstract. It seems to be any effort to try to create more diversity or try to foster more diversity. Any effort, if it happens organically, then they're like, oh yeah, that's fine. But if the state or if individual actors take any effort to try to improve outcomes and create environments where there could be more diversity, they really seem to take offense to that.
Well, I think it's both, actually. I think that, yes, when there's active measures to try and promote diversity, of course, it's received with hostility by some. But I think that there's unfortunately a natural hostility to, like you're saying, the organic growth of diversity that we've just seen in recent decades. I mean, look, it's from a diversity kind of number standpoint. Everybody has heard those numbers about, the white Americans will be a minority in this country numbers wise by, some soon coming decade, 2040, 2050. I think it was 2016.
They'll be less than 50%. So it's like, it won't be any group that's larger than them, but they themselves will be less than 50%. So the other percentages will add up.
But that is something new in the American experience. And there's a lot of people who have been led to feel very insecure about that based on political leaders, their media ecosystems, all that, with ideas like the Great Replacement Theory and all this stuff, which is real. Like, that's what I'm saying is there's a lot of that feeling with a lot of Americans, whether they fully subscribe to these ideas or it's just a kind of feeling that my group isn't being treated fair anymore. And I've seen it with personal friends of mine that I've had discussions with that have told me, yeah, Tunde, I think that when I hear of a kid getting into an Ivy League school, I really do think that it's meaning a non-white kid. I've had my friends say this to me, a couple of them, that I do feel like it's taken away from my kid's ability to be in a similar situation in a university. Now, I had a good friend of mine tell me this while his son is at one of the top universities in our state, but he was talking about the Harvard case with the thing. And I'm just thinking like, that's interesting. So your son's at one of the top universities in our state doing a great job and having a great education. But yet, because of something that has been in place to try and include others into the experience that your son is having, you look at it as someone taking from you. And I think that's just cultural, that we have, unfortunately, developed a culture of where many Americans
it's an
feel
entitlement,
hostile.
though. It's an entitlement because you only feel like it's being taken if you feel like you're entitled to that. Like that's kind of implicit in that. And it's telling that the mindset comes from, okay, well, I belong, you don't. So any effort to allow you to be there is disrupting this piece of I belong and you don't. So like that, like a lot of that, it's difficult to unpack all that because
Yeah.
a lot of it is implicit. It's built into the conversation, but we don't acknowledge it. And I'm not saying that to throw stones. I'm just saying for you to say if someone else is getting an opportunity, then that takes away from my opportunity. The implicit statement there is it's my opportunity. I'm entitled to that, and you're not. If we're both entitled to it, then that same conversation is nonsensical. You see what I'm saying? So, but go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off, but I just wanted to point that.
And I realized too. That's why I figured. Let me get back to answering one of the main initial questions, which is about the kind of the study, the argument in this article that McKinsey was whether embellishing or doing causation stuff, whatever, about the results of the study as relates to profitability. Now, am I willing to believe that a non-diverse company can be more profitable than a diverse company? Of course. It just depends on what industry they're in and how much profit they're making. I mean, I'm going to assume Facebook isn't the most diverse company in corporate leadership, but they're extremely profitable, or Meta, right? So, that to me is an argument that is a little bit of a distraction. I think the bigger idea, and this is where I think a lot of these arguments become disingenuous, because when it comes to whether DEI and all these, again, things that some people find so hostile, the idea is not saying that just because you have non-white people in this company means it's going to be more profitable. What the concept is that if you have a workforce that reflects maybe more of the community that you're serving, that there will be an easier way to deal with everything from profitability to solving problems.
I think it goes beyond that. And I do think that the people who are criticizing it are purposefully either they don't see the point or they're purposefully trying to not engage with the point. Because the point of this is not that by, like you said, by hiring or by having people on a certain group of people that look like this on the board, or they're this gender on the board, that because of that, you will be rolling around in profits. The point is that companies that make efforts to find the best people, no matter what they look like. A lot of these efforts are to save people from themselves. What the real takeaway is that discrimination is not profitable. Discrimination takes energy that could go towards finding the best, being the best, and actually take that energy and make it towards exclusion. Taking energy and putting it towards exclusion does not increase profitability, and in fact reduces profitability. So the bigger point is that companies that have systems in place and approach things and mindsets that are governing, that say, hey, we're looking for the best no matter what they look like. Sometimes we might have to look a little harder in certain places, but we want to find the right kind of people. We want to empower the right kind of people, not because they're friends with my, oh, yeah, I'm friends with this guy, let me just bring him in, or, whatever. But I want to find the best people. Those companies tend to have better outcomes. That's the point. So it's not about who's being hired. It's about the nature of the company and how they do business. And they take efforts to save themselves from the natural form of, oh, I know this person, so I'll just bring this person in, whether they're the most qualified or not, whether, everything like that. So to me, to obscure that piece, because nobody's out here arguing that discrimination makes more money. Again, let's close off 40% of the population, or if you're talking gender, let's close off 50% of the population, or you're talking, whatever, certain races or whatever, let's close off. And we're not even going to look for bright people there. That will put you in a less advantageous situation. The only kind of the caveat, so to speak, from that is the worldview of supremacy. Basically, if you just think that certain people are more capable, then obviously you would slip into this and saying, oh, well, there is nothing to gain from bringing in the best and the brightest from this group or that group, because my group, so to speak, is the only group that has anything to offer. Outside of that logic, though, again, it's about the systems. And again, a lot of these things, it's similar to the first point, the first conversation we had. It's about the setup, the structure. If you have a strong structure, then a strong organization can flourish. If you make the organization about the whims of individuals and like, oh, this is what I like, this is what I feel comfortable with right now, I don't want to expand my horizons, then you inherently limit yourself and you put yourself in situations that may not end up being optimized as good as they could. So to me, I think it's whether it's the author can see it or not. The author of the Wall Street Journal piece is clearly missing the point on what the McKinsey study was establishing in terms of the way that companies who end up being more diverse operates tends to allow them to flourish.
Yeah, no, and it's, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the examples, right? Like the boom of the U.S. economy post the civil rights era, starting from the early 70s. I know our economy is too big for it to have one factor, but one could say, right, the end of kind of legal segregation in this country helped push the economy along. One could compare, for the last 150 years, the economies of the segregated South versus the more integrated North and West of the United States. And even today, the remnants of that infrastructure, most of the economic activity in this country comes from the diverse areas. All the places that certain people in this country hate, like the coast, big cities, things like that. If you look at every state, majority of the economic activity that pays for everything else in that state comes from the diverse areas. So let me tie this point, because the thing is, again, I would say that it's not necessarily because those areas are diverse. It's because those areas are diverse, they have to operate in a way where most of their energy doesn't go towards keeping people down. Mississippi probably has more problems because a large number of people spend a lot of their time and energy focused on trying to keep other people down. But let's not make everybody the best they can be. Let's make certain people the best they can be. And let's spend our other time trying to keep these other people from being good. That's not going to be productive for your economy. That's not going to help you move things forward. And so to me, it's really about more of the misplaced energy trying to hold things down and then say, man, I can't believe we don't grow as much as everybody else, when you're spending 40% of your energy not trying to push up, but trying to hold down. Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one could tell me, hey, well, Mississippi's a diverse state. And I think, the black population is like 45% or something like that. But you're right. I'm not talking about diversity just because there's X amount of people of this or that in a certain given area. I'm talking about true diversity, which, to your point, is trying to have the ability to actually go out and include everyone. And in states like Mississippi, not to get off a tangent, right? But if you look at the things like the scandal with Brett Favre, he's a drop in the bucket. The amount of money stolen from Mississippi citizens is an example of that, where people are saying, well, we can just keep all this from all these people over here. What happens is, when you don't support all these people over here, there's no velocity of money in that part of the economy, in that part of the society. And so
you're not able to harvest the best and the brightest, whatever percent of them that are really, really bright or really, really hardworking, you're not even able to pull them in and get them working towards pulling everything up, because you're literally taking all your energy and saying, let's keep them excluded from this.
And I think that's the example, James, like it's true. Like someone like me, I'm not going to put you in this, but when I look at all these people in these recent years that are so, like our governor, so hostile to this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's like, okay, I get it. I know that, we hate bleeding heart people and all this stuff. But it's like the level of hostility they have to this idea of just including other people. And we had that, the quote earlier this year by a young YouTube guy, when he was saying something like, well, I don't want to think like this, but if I get on a plane and I see a black pilot, I'm not going to be sure if he's qualified. And the interesting thing when I hear that kind of stuff is these people gin themselves up and talk to themselves in their own echo chamber. Because when I walk on a plane and I see a pilot of any group, black, white, Asian, I don't care, my first assumption is, oh, this white guy, pilot, he was given a job because his cousin is the CEO or something. That's not what I'm thinking. My first thought is United Airlines or Delta or whoever I'm flying obviously thinks this guy's qualified to fly a plane. Yeah. The example would be, James, if United Airlines called you and said, James Keys, I know you've been a great attorney, but we're looking for black pilots and we're going to put you in a plane right now. Like, that's my point. Like, these people don't stop to think that, and not the ones that push this out, but the ones that consume it, which are a lot of people I got to deal with. they don't stop to think about, do you think Delta Airlines really going to put a guy like me in a cockpit with no training and just say, yeah, because you're black, we're just going to give you a handout job and let you fly this plane into the ground and deal with the liability later? Like, well, it's such an affront to reality. And
as you point out, it's a choice. It's a choice to say, okay, this is when I see this, this is what I want to think. Because like you said, the example, and this is the example I get, like, if you want, you can always look, okay, well, I'm looking at this group and saying, oh, well, this person's probably there because, their dad probably knew somebody or something like that. Yeah. You could choose to think like that as well, but you can also choose to say, okay, well, like you said, if this X and X company, they don't want to get sued, so they're probably going to, find competent people and keep it moving from there. The fixation on, like, I'm not really paying attention to the race of the pilot when I get on a plane.
Exactly. Like, that's my point. You assume that they're qualified because they're sitting in a cockpit.
Because they're sitting in a cockpit. So, like, to me, what stands out about that is more so the fixation on it. Look, hey, this person's here. What do they look like? And what do they, what's their background and stuff like that? And it's like, well, why do you spend so much time worrying about that? The idea of the zero sum comes into that and saying, oh, well, this person probably took away an opportunity from, a person who could have been more qualified. But again, that one, there's a lot of assumption baked into that. And two, that goes right back to that entitlement. And entitlement is just not a mindset for growth. I mean, and that's really the problem that we have to wrestle with, is that the more people in our society that have these entitlement mentalities, we can't open this up for this group of people or anything like that, because it'll take away my opportunities or opportunities for people like me. That type of entitlement actually is the most damaging thing from a growth standpoint, which again is kind of the point of the McKinsey study, is that it's not what the diversity, it's not the existence of the diversity itself. It's that the mindsets of that led to the diversity tend to be more growth mindsets. They tend to be people who are less entitled about where they need to be and where they should be. And that they, hey, no matter what I do, no matter how much work I put in, this is mine because I was born this way or something like that. And so again, that's the piece that, again, you don't know whether that's just a blind spot or whether someone's purposefully ignoring it. So I'm not going to cast aspersion on the motives. But what is very apparent to me, and what is always missing, or oftentimes missing from these discussions, is not that the diversity is not the end, so to speak. The diversity, it represents an approach, a system that is a healthier system for encouraging growth and for getting the best out of the most people. And if we're in a society and we're all together, we should be trying to get the best out of most people if we want better outcomes. Like that kind of goes, that's kind of obvious, like, hey, if I'm on a football team, I'd want all 22 people, like 22, 11 offense, 11 defense. I want all of them to get their best. I don't want it to say, oh, well, let's screw over this position group and let's try to hold them down. That's make the whole team worse, So anytime you're in a situation where you have a collective, and, a nation can be a collective, a company can be a collective, all of that, you want to get the best out of the most people and create environments where people can flourish. And that's what the diversity that they're pointing to represents more than anything else. So anything else before we close this up?
Yeah. I mean, you make a good allusion to the idea of a team, but that's where, unfortunately, we've got many of our fellow Americans who have been conditioned to believe that it's not about Team America. It's about team, whatever they feel their group is, right? Their ethnicity or whatever. And so
a lot of this does, though, especially, when you talk about people you interact with, it goes back to, and some of this it goes on to the leadership of just, of society. And what do you feel good about? Do you feel good about free market societies? Do you feel good about, being in a democratic society or, the Constitution? Or do you feel good about your race? Like, oh, okay, well, I feel good about my race. If you feel good about, if you're told to feel good about your race, if you have, and some of this goes to, Du Bois and the psychic wage and all that stuff. But if your race is what you feel good about in terms of, okay, this is what gives me pride, not your country or not the economic system or anything like that, then yes, if you see people of other races or if gender is what makes you feel good about yourself, if you see people of other genders doing well, that is offensive to you, because the thing you have been told to feel good about yourself, the reason you are told to be proud of yourself, not because you live in, a country that has, like a constitution and unlike any government, in history of the world and all that stuff, and it's been going for 200 years, not that, but just because of your race, then yes, success by people who are not in that race or not in that gender or whatever it is that you feel good about is going to bother you. And so some of that is if we want to be on the same team, so to speak, then we have to try to pump up the things that we share in common and say, okay, yes, we're all going to feel good about these things, and then try to really double down on those and improve those as best we can. So, and that's kind of, again,
Yeah.
some people derive power from not doing that. Some people derive power from making people hostile to each other. But that definitely doesn't build the country up, or if you're talking from a corporate standpoint, that doesn't build a company up to be as strong as it can be. Yeah. And that's kind of the point.
And it's a great point. Just to finish up here is really is a mindset, because as you're saying, I'm thinking about, like, I'm a man, right? And I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'4".
Yeah.
So I've heard these studies, like taller men get deference in certain respects. I think I read something that most of this male CEOs of Fortune 100 companies are over 6'1". So if someone were to come to me and say, well, because you're a man and you're tall and this and that, you have a kind of, in our culture, there's a certain deference you're paid, and it might create an advantage. And so for that reason, we're going to support, a certain amount of percentage of in your city, like women-owned businesses, and maybe even businesses that can be run by people under 5'5". My point is I wouldn't then redirect all my activity all day and act like that's the most hostile thing to me.
Well, but that's because of your mentality, and that you don't associate your self-worth with being 6'4". If you did associate your self-worth with being 6'4", then you would have a problem with that. Because then it's
but that's what I'm saying. It makes me realize that it's a mindset. Like, I'm not hostile. Like, I wouldn't be hostile, because that does exist here in our county.
But it is where you associate your self-worth, And so, like, again, some things you can associate your self-worth can be positive for an overall group. Some can be not positive for the overall group and can make you adverse to members of the same group. So, but I think we can wrap this topic up from there. We appreciate you for joining us on this second topic for the day, and definitely join us for the third topic as well.